Hello there. Happy Friday. TGIF, right? TGI memory? TGI YouTube today? Maybe? No, you're probably going to watch this at another time, but that's okay. I'm here for you whenever you need to watch the video. So today I'm going to go over semantic memory, both for the online classes and you lazy bums that haven't been coming to the actual in-person class. I know you're out there. So in episodic memory, we were talking about episodes. Now we're going to be talking about semantic memory, which is your general world knowledge and the system that encodes that, stores that, and helps you in retrieving that kind of memory. And tied into semantic memory is lexical memory, which we'll get to at the end of the video. So we're really talking about two topics right now, semantic memory and lexical memory. If you're going through the PowerPoints, going through my PowerPoint, should be chapter 5, PowerPoint JH. You'll see in slide 3 this example of an associative network memory model, which is what we primarily look at when we're looking at semantic memory and the kinds of connections that we have in our semantic memory. And you'll see in all of these examples of models, these different little circles or squares or whatever connected to other circles or squares or whatever with different words in them. And those are the different associations that we have with any particular concept or idea that's stored in our semantic memory. So basically with this associative model, we are positing that our semantic memory looks like a web. So all of the facts and information that we have in our brain are interconnected to things that are related to it. And these individual little circles or squares or whatever that we're representing in this associative model can be defined as a node. So a node is your basic unit of memory. Now remember back to our previous working memory and whatnot lessons, and we had Lashley who tried to define n-gram as this basic tiny little unit of memory. So don't confuse a node with an n-gram. An n-gram was more of a physical location in your brain for any particular unit of knowledge, and a node is an actual unit of memory that isn't a physical place in your brain per se, but more of just the smallest concept of any given thing in your semantic memory. So when you're looking at that associative model example, those are all nodes that are interconnected with one another. And some of them are closely connected and some of them are more distantly connected. And the closer those nodes are to one another, the more strong the connection and the easier it's going to be for you to recall that subsequent, maybe secondary, tertiary information relative to that first node that you're trying to retrieve. So what happens is if you're thinking about something, you're trying to retrieve a particular idea, you're essentially cueing your semantic memory. And you're hoping by cueing this that you're going to have a successful retrieval of whatever it is that you're trying to retrieve. So that input is the cue for whatever node you're trying to retrieve. So I have my little example here. Hopefully it pops up and it's not backwards for you guys. Oh my God, it's backwards. But you can see what it said, right? So I don't know how to mirror this so that it's not backwards anymore. But it says Disney. Just pretend that Disney is flipped the other way around. So say that that's our basic node. You're like super excited. You want to go to Disney for all this Halloween stuff that's going on right now. So you've cued it, you activated it, and now you have something that's going to occur. It's called spreading activation. So once you activate that node of Disney, you're going to have all of your surrounding nodes that are related to your concept of whatever Disney is, because it's different to all of us, trust me. It's very different to me than it is to some of you. But you'll have spreading activation where that node of Disney and then other related things will activate, light up, you'll be able to recall all of this subsequent information. So for some of you, let's see, I want to draw this, but it's going to be backwards. So just pretend that it's all forwards. For some of you, you have a little thing that's like Mickey, and then maybe characters. Maybe you've got Epcot that pops up. And then maybe for somebody like me, yeah, long lines. And how many times that I've probably gotten heat sick, which if you can't read that forward, but it's backwards. So you'll have different things that will activate themselves in this kind of associative network that hopefully when you go to retrieve it isn't backwards. Let's be real here. So from just that concept of Disney, you can have nodes activated all the way out to things that you would not necessarily think have a direct connection to Disney. And maybe they don't. Maybe they don't have a line that goes directly from Disney to, say, heat sick for me in my little Disney associative model map. But going to Disney does make me think of these really long lines, which makes me think of being heat sick, which off the top of my head makes me think of Hurricane Andrew, when we had to wait in all of these lines in the heat to get whatever it was that we needed. And then I remember one time getting heat sick in the post office line, and there were trailers involved. See, so we've gone from Disney now to this whole completely different area of my memory, but it was triggered by something that triggers similar memories to all of those things. And to me, what it has in common is long lines and being in the heat. Now, for most of you, you're thinking Disney, vacation, family, characters, food, rides, ears, any number of probably really positive things. I know, you can hate on me. I'm not a Disney freak. Except for when it comes to this guy. I'll fight you if you don't think Betamax is the best Disney character of all time. So you can do that same exercise with literally anything. Pick a word and write it down and start drawing associations outwards. And that's why when you think of things, you can be sitting here maybe idly thinking about any given topic, and you'll find yourself thinking about something that seems to have absolutely no relation to what it initially was that you were thinking about. I do this all the time when I'm driving. I'll be thinking about the work that I need to do, and somehow I'll be thinking about how I spent my childhood watching the WWE. Something totally irrelevant, but it all ties back in. So you're not going crazy. You just have a pretty good network that has pretty strong interconnected nodes that are traveling from one thing to the next. Take it as a good thing and not a sign of insanity. So in terms of looking at how our nodes are interconnected and proving that there is an interconnectedness for one, and that there is differences in the strength of interconnectedness of ideas, there are a couple of tasks that you can do to prime yourself to show that one word or idea is related to other words or ideas. So as researchers, what we would do in this process is either a semantic priming test that's a lexical decision task, or a sentence verification task. And both of them are gonna look really similar. So you'll go into a researcher's office, you'll sit down, you'll be put in front of a computer, and you'll be given the directions with the lexical decision task first, that either you're gonna say yes or no. So a word's going to pop up, and you're going to identify whether or not it's a real word. So in the examples in the slide, you have kids versus ginks. No idea if ginks is or isn't a word in some language somewhere, but in English it's not. So in general, when these words pop up, depending on the sophistication of the word. So if we were looking at kids versus children versus kindergartners versus making them more complex concepts, it'd take us a little bit longer. But if we're just looking at kids versus red versus sky versus whatever, if we weren't primed with something else, we expect them to take the same general amount of time for us to say yes or no, that is or isn't a word. But if I sit you down and I talk with you about going to an elementary school, or ask you what your fondest memory was of childhood, and then I put up tasks, or I put up these different words for you, you're going to select yes for kids quicker than you will for words that are not related to the thing that I just talked to you about. So by priming you with a concept or an idea prior to giving you this task and then seeing what your response time is to different words, we can see that whatever I primed you with is quicker in terms of your response time than whatever I didn't prime you with. So we've already activated those nodes prior to giving you the task, and because they're activated, they're now better at recalling whether or not these things are or aren't a word. So the same general idea applies to the, I have to remember, PowerPoint hates me, I have to remember this, but the same general idea applies to the sentence verification test. So you'll get a similar thing with a box that either says true or false. And you could have a question that's the sky is blue, right? True. Pretty simple question. Or you can have something that's really complicated. So a croissant is a type of French pastry item. Maybe that's a little too sophisticated. But if we had, like, similar to the other type of task, if I had sat with you beforehand and either given you some sort of priming on colors or the sky, or talked to you extensively about French bakeries, you'd be able to say whether those things are true or false a little quicker than if I had not primed you with that kind of knowledge. Now, also, if I hadn't primed you with anything and I just gave you those two tasks, it'd be easier for you to say that the sky is blue, unless you're one of those really, anarchy loving people that are like, you know what? The sky is not blue. It's not. And then you rattle off the whole reason of why we think it's blue, but perceptually, it's really not anything different than XYZ, right? I lost my train of thought making fun of people that don't even exist. But when you're trying to identify something simple like that versus something that might be more complex to you because you don't know what actually is in a French bakery, you'd be more likely to quickly say true to the sky is blue than true to a croissant is a part of a French bakery, right? So, now I really want a croissant. Another thing that plays a part in that is the previous knowledge that you had of either one of those things. So even if I haven't semantically primed you, if you worked in a bakery at a previous point in your life, or you are one of those passionate, the sky is not blue kind of people, then you might select true versus false quicker. Also, in general, people select true quicker than they select false. And I think that that is because people tend to want to make sure before they deny something is true or not, if it really is. You take some extra time thinking and ruling out the options as opposed to finding one thing that validates what you're saying. So if we use the croissant example. So if I say to you that a croissant is a French breakfast item, and you've ever eaten a croissant somewhere that's in a French bakery, you can say, yes, it is a breakfast item, and you can validate that in your head. But say you've never eaten it somewhere for breakfast, but you don't necessarily know that it's not one of those items. So then you kind of rack your brain, and you have to find other things to piece together whether or not that sentence is true or not, other than your own personal experience with it. So you might have a process of elimination or whatever it is that gets you to that point. You can ramble like I ramble. So moving on into the semantic structures, there are two structures. One is called a concept and one is called a category. So if I was to pull up my little backwards Disney map, you could think of that as a concept of Disney. So it's all of the things associated with that particular idea of what going to Disney is. Now, a category is going to be something a little bit more specific, and it's going to have nested structures or levels underneath it. So maybe I took one of those aspects of going to Disney, like just the heat-related, be out in the sun things, or just the I love the characters, I'm a Disney addict, sign me up sort of things. And within those categories, you'd have these nested levels. So we'll stick with the Disney theme. Maybe we want to talk about Disney characters. So maybe, or maybe we can stick, no, you know what? We'll go with Disney movies. Maybe that will be a little better. So we're going to have 3 different levels. And I want you to go to the slide that has all of the nested levels so you can compare these for examples. So you're going to have a basic level, which is going to be whatever with the example of the Disney thing, it'll be whatever the particular movie is. So for me, we're going to call it Big Hero 6, right? So at the basic level, you're just going to have the basic concept of whatever the movie is. Then at the superordinate level, the higher level, we're going to categorize everything as Disney movies. So under that superordinate thing of Disney movies, you'd have Big Hero 6, you'd have Peter Pan, you'd have Lion King, you'd have whatever. And maybe underneath that, you have something extremely more specific. So say we went from Disney to Star Wars, and then we had episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, the Clone Wars, the this, the that, the very, very specific different types of Star Wars movies that you have. Those would be your superordinate or your extremely detailed examples of what that basic level is. So for each category that you have, regardless of what it is, an easy one to define is animals. So your superordinate category would be animals, your basic category would be dogs, and then your subordinate category would be German Shepherd, Rottweiler, whatnot, the very specific types of dogs. So regardless, that is what a category is. You have different levels of being able to identify what are in those categories, and they help you when you're processing new information to decide whether or not something belongs in a category. So there's 2 different main ways that you decide whether or not something should belong in a particular category in your semantic memory. So the first is by having one thing that's within that category that typifies to you what a member of that category should look like. So maybe if we were looking at Disney movies, your favorite movie is, I'm going to go with Aladdin. It's my favorite movie. Not my favorite, but my favorite at this current moment because it's the only thing I can really think of. So you've decided that that is the prototype of what family resemblance and membership in a category should be. So when you see other movies, not knowing whether or not they are Disney movies, you compare it to that one to decide whether or not that new movie has membership in your semantic memory of Disney. So if you were doing this with animals, so say you were looking at the category of dogs, you have a very typical thing that you think of when you think of dogs, which for us Americans is usually something like a golden retriever or a Labrador. So you have a prototype, and that's exactly what this is called. It's called prototype theory. So you will compare dogs against the prototype, and if it matches, they're a member of the category now. If it doesn't match, they're not a member of the category, and we find somewhere else that we're going to put them in our semantic memory. So even though we have something that's a prototype, it's still flexible. So if my prototype is a golden retriever and you give me German Shepherd, they might not be the same color. They might not have the same fur length. They might not have the same dopey face and like to swim in water in the same ways, but they have enough similar characteristics to that prototype that I go, okay, German Shepherds can be in my dog category. The second type of categorization is called exemplar theory. So it's kind of the opposite of what prototype theory is. Instead of picking one thing, you kind of pick an average of what all of the things are in your category by maintaining all of the things in that category when you're comparing something. So maybe if you are not very good at knowing the different types of dogs, maybe you've only seen a few in your life, which is sad. Go see dogs They're amazing. Humans don't deserve them, right? So you've got German Shepherd in there. You've got your Golden Retriever. You've got your Chihuahua. You've got whatever. Every single example of what you have in your head is a dog. And maybe somehow you've never seen a poodle before. So you're trying now. You're looking at that poodle. You're like, it's got 4 legs. It's got a tail. It's got fur. It barks. It's kind of like every other thing in my category of dog, even though it has a very funny haircut. But I'm going to go ahead and put it in there because it matches the overall average of what I think all of these different examples of what a dog are. So depending on the type of category of information, the type of person you are, whatever it is, how simple or complex the category might be, you're going to store things into categories in different ways. So one is not better than the other, and you probably utilize both of them in terms of organizing your semantic memory. So moving on, another aspect of semantic memory, schemas and scripts. I love schemas and scripts. It's one of my favorite parts of semantic memory because I like to think that I violate everybody's schema and script of what it means to be in a college class. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's not. Nah. Hopefully it's a good thing for you if you're watching this video right now. But a schema, having been in psychology, I'm going to assume for at least a semester or two, you probably heard of what a schema is. So it's a generalized knowledge about a particular event or person or group or situation. In short, it's what you expect to happen or expect something to react in a certain way to something that you do. It's your general idea. So you have a particular schema of what it means to take a class, whether it's online or in person or in high school or in college or whatever. So you have this general idea. I'm going to have a class. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to listen to somebody talk to me. They may or may not be entertaining. And then the class is going to be over and I'm going to get up and I'm going to leave. I'm going to take tests. I'm going to get graded. And then a new semester is going to start. So the schema would be of the broader thing of what it means for you to be a student in a class. Now, a script is more of an idea of what's going to happen at an individual instance in the classroom, if we were looking at the schema as being a student. So your script-based knowledge would be more of, especially once you've had multiple classes with a professor, you go in, you know the way they're going to start, you know the way they phrase things. Maybe you've learned how they write essay questions or test questions or whatnot. You have a particular idea at any given instant in that classroom what the script is going to be. So if you had a professor that came in and out of nowhere, they just started lecturing like this and they busted out and they did some sort of song and dance, and then the whole rest of the lecture was done in the style of Broadway and they had jazz hands, it would probably violate your script of what you think is going to happen in a classroom. But for me, you'd probably be like, you know what? That's one of the more normal things she's done, which is why I love to be a violator of script and schema-based knowledge. That's when you're like, hey, are you serious? Are you really going to drop a lowest grade on something? Are you serious? I can really turn it in late. That's because I violate your schema of what it means to be in class. And that's okay. I'm okay with that. All right, so now we're moving into the lexical part of semantic memory. So the general study of how psychology, semantics, and linguistics all tie into one another is called psycholinguistics. So in psycholinguistics, we're looking at the production of language, how we understand language, what the relationship is between spoken and written language and the rules behind spoken and written language, and how language is represented in our brain. So you have some just different dictionary type definitions of the aspects of lexical memory here. So phonetics is how the things that I say sound the way they do, and how I make those sounds. So what physical mechanisms are there that allow me to make particular sounds? Phonology is the study of sounds. Anytime you see something that ends in ology, you can bet it's the study of whatever the word was before that. So phonology, the study of sounds. Semantics is the meaning of words. So you'll hear people say, that's just semantics, meaning we differ on our opinions of what that means, but it's not really like I'm wrong. It's really like I'm right. You just don't agree with me semantically. Then you have syntax, which is grammar and the other rules of how you structure or order language within a particular. Sorry, I have a cat that just knocked something down and it sounded really bad. Those of you who have animals know that ominous sound of the crash, and I don't want to know what it is. They just did it again. Pray for my soul. Between PowerPoint, the printer, YouTube, and now them, it's not looking good, guys. Back into our dictionary definitions here. Pragmatics is language use and why you do in a particular context. So why, this is a good example of pragmatics. Why do you talk to your parents differently than you talk to your friends? Admit it, you have a completely different available lexicon when you're talking to adults or senior people who are your seniors, or you should. And then you've got your friends that you have like the watered down, non-restricted, not as grammatically correct way that you usually talk to them. Why? Why do you talk differently to different types of people? Morphology is how words are constructed. So you had phonology, which is how sounds are constructed. Now you have morphology, how words are constructed. Morphemes, which are the smallest units of meaning in a language. A word, which is the smallest unit of grammar. And then a lexicon, which is your given mental dictionary. So all of the words that you possess are in your lexicon. Hopefully you speak them a little bit better than I am right now. So lexical memory falls under the declarative category of memory. We can verbalize what we mean. It's declarative, we state it. And especially in the English language, words can mean extremely different things. So we have to very quickly be able to choose the right word, understand why it is the right word, and then say the correct word, unlike me in this YouTube video today. It's going to be okay. Whatever they knocked down is replaceable. It is all about their survival because they're my children, right? Right? We're just going to go with that. So when we're looking at lexical memory and we're looking at the same general thing that we did with nodes, you cue something and you want to retrieve something, a word. There are 3 steps to this process. The first stage is representation, which is the conceptual level. Now, in your PowerPoints, there should be the example of the strawberry, which if you see that, you can then compare this to. But at the concept level, you're trying to think of a particular thing. So maybe I want to get something to eat. I want it to be really sweet. I know that it's a fruit. I'm parsing through this context of the different things that I may or may not eat. Then between that conceptual level and the next level down, you have something called an idea, which is your aha moment of whatever it is that you're trying to look for. So in the example, in the actual chart, it's strawberry. In my goofy examples in the slides, it's Pikachu, right? So at the conceptual level, if it was Pikachu, you'd be like Pokemon, yellow, dorky thing, professor never shuts up about Pokemon. And then you might have the idea, aha, it's Pikachu, right? So the next level down from the representation is known as the lemma. Not the dilemma, just the lemma. So that's where all of the semantics, the differences in meaning, and the syntax, how you should be using this word in terms of order and grammar, gets processed. So you've got the concept, you have the idea, you know what you're looking at, you need to know what the meaning is of those individual concepts. So we're deciding what the meaning is as we process it. And then at the next level, which is the lexeme, that's where we pull all of these things together into the actual pronunciation of the words that we're trying to retrieve. They're howling now. It's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time. So just like everything else that we've talked about, there has to be something to verify what we're saying, that there are 3 steps in this process. So there's a couple of different errors that we have that prove that there are different levels of retrieving and speaking a word. So the first is called a word exchange error. So this is an error somewhere at the lemma level where you are trying to get maybe Pikachu, but you retrieve instead Bulbasaur, because it's a Pokemon and maybe you don't know Pokemon very well and you have this error at the meaning level and you end up retrieving the wrong Pokemon. Never happens with me. I get the right one every time. So that proves that as you're going down from the concept to the idea into the meaning and the syntax and then moving on into how you pronounce the word, you may have some error and you pull up the wrong word, not the one you were looking for. The second thing that could happen is a sound substitution. So maybe you get all the way down to where you're going to actually pronounce something to the lexeme level, and you end up slipping up and saying a word that's really similar. Now, what's really similar to Pikachu, I don't know, but I'm sure there's something out there. There you go. You guys love writing to me in the comments. What rhymes with Pikachu? So you say something, the picnic. You say something like picnic instead because it's similar, it sounds similar, it has some of the similar ick. It starts with a P, you use that on accident. Could have come up with a better example, I know. But right now I'm thinking about the fact that tomorrow is Community Day and I'm going to be playing Pokemon Go. Let that sink in for you. Maybe that's why my cats are revolting. They want a cooler owner. Maybe. So think of those times that you've said things and they were Freudian slips. We love that term, Freudian slip, where you mean to say something and you actually say something that's really similar to it. So you knew exactly what the meaning was. You got all the way down to the level of actually pronouncing it and something totally different comes out. And then you get really embarrassed because usually when you have those Freudian slips, it's something really inappropriate. No, I'm not going to give you a really inappropriate. Maybe I will. I remember watching Sex and the City. You know where this is going. I'm not going to go through with the whole thing, but Samantha, she goes and walks over to her neighbor and she's like, "Oh my God, my dog ran up on your bleep." And she goes, "Oh no, I mean deck," right? Freudian slip. She wanted the guy bleep, but the dog really ran up on the deck. All of you that have never seen this before, again, I got to give you a reason to think I'm insane every single one of these videos, but it's somewhat entertaining, right? So in the latter part of the chapter, we talk about a bilingual lexicon. And I must admit to you, this is not the area that I have the most familiarity with because I'm not bilingual. So I speak English, have a very few words or phrases in Spanish and maybe some swear words in other languages that I know. But for the most part, it's just one lexicon of English that's floating around in my brain. But suppose that I was bilingual. Most of you probably are. There's 2 different ways of looking at, because there's always 2 different ways of looking at your lexicons. So one is a single store view, which means all of your language from both, all of your words, context, syntax, whatnot, from both languages are in one general knowledge bubble in your head. So when you're trying to recall a word, whether it's in Spanish or English, they think that you're pulling it from the same general place. That all words, all lexical memory gets stored within the same kind of unit of information. And then there's the dual store view, which is that each one of your languages has its own lexicon. And when you go to pull a word from any given language, you'd be pulling it from 2 different spots, which would mean that pulling, so if you were speaking in English and trying to remember a word in Spanish, it would take you a little bit longer in this dual store view because you'd be switching from one area of information to another, depending on how closely related those 2 types of information were in your semantic memory. So in talking with students in classes. Research supports the single store view, that all of our lexical information comes in one little bubble, regardless of how many languages we know. But especially from talking to students who have grown up speaking one language and then have a second language that comes in much later, there are certain things that seem to be in that single store, but then maybe more complex parts of language, especially if it wasn't in your primary language, that might be in a dual store sort of thing where you have to then think for a minute about that very specific word. And a student gave me an example of learning English later in life, and that when trying to come up with a very passionate or complicated or emotionally driven word that's not a simple concept in English, they might have to say it in Spanish because it would take too long to go and then retrieve it from the English lexicon. So I think there's something to some people having a dual store. It's more about how you actually learn a language. And in terms of learning languages, there's a few different ways that you can go about doing it. So the traditional method is to do something like Rosetta Stone, sit down, translate directly from English to Spanish or Spanish to English or English to French, French to whatever it is that you're trying to learn, having your base parent language and then translating things to and from the secondary language to learn it. Not going to be the greatest at helping you become fluent in a language. So option number 2, go and submerge yourself in a language. You want to learn Italian? Go move to Italy, never use English and only interact with people in Italian. But that can also backfire on you. A lot of times people use language and it's not correct, but it's a slang for something. Or maybe you have some pretty cruel Italian countrymen who decide that they are going to teach you the wrong words for certain things. And then you've learned that you've got some really inappropriate way of saying bread, but because they reaffirm to you that it is the way that you should say it, you've now learned this incorrectly. And since you didn't have a chance to refer it back to your native tongue, you don't truly know the meaning of what it is that you're learning. So submersion, it can help you become very fluent in conversational languages that are not your home native language. But in terms of learning the syntax and meaning, probably not as good. Another option is by immersing yourself, but still having the option of using your native tongue or first language, primary language, whatever it is you want to refer back to. And there is something that's going on in school systems now where they're teaching completely bilingually. So they'll have one day where they teach in English and one day where they teach the same exact subject in Spanish. So it's not just that some days you have Spanish class. It's some days algebra is taught to you in Spanish. And then the next day it's taught to you in English. So then you can kind of juxtapose the meaning of both languages while still being able to ask questions and understand why the syntax is the way it is in those languages. And those schools are becoming more popular, and they're very efficient at creating bilinguals that actually know written and oral language usage. And then the last is an audio-lingual route, which is just by learning through pure conversation. Not like going to Italy and everything, you've immersed yourself, all the signs are in a particular language, whatnot. No, you're just going to talk to somebody, and that's how you're going to learn it, which is the primary way that a lot of people in Miami know Spanish. They've been talked to in Spanish enough to learn it conversationally, but maybe don't understand the written form of the language. And that's why things like Spanglish come about, because somebody doesn't know a word for something, or there's a slang mixed in there, and now we've got two languages that are just all mixed and mashed up together, like Spanglish. Pero Spanglish is great. I'm not knocking it. There's a slide in here on children and language, but for the most part, this is something that we're going to talk about in the actual childhood memory section. So it's not something you really need to worry about yet. If you're taking the course online, particularly the memory course online, you might want to go over the slides because a question might pop up for it. But in terms of me going over it, you're going to have to wait until that point in the semester. So I'm not going to lie. This might have been one of the rougher YouTube videos this semester. I'm really scared to go see what's outside my door right now. But I'm going to have to do it. Just like you're going to have to take the quiz for this. We're both going to get through it together. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. I'm always here for you. Have a great weekend.